The conference room fell silent as I finished presenting my quarterly marketing proposal. 3 weeks of research, analysis, and sleepless nights had gone into those slides. I looked around the table, hoping to see nods of approval from my colleagues. Instead, I heard Richard West's familiar laugh. "Oh, Donald," he said, leaning back in his leather chair like a king on his throne. "That's adorable." "Really?" He turned to face the other executives, his smile sharp as a knife. "Did everyone hear that? Our little analyst here thinks he can revolutionize our entire marketing strategy." My cheeks burned. The other managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Richard wasn't done. "Tell you what, Donna boy," he continued, using the nickname he knew I hated. "Why don't you repeat your brilliant idea about social media engagement? I want everyone to hear this comedy gold again." I gripped my presentation folder tighter. My voice came out smaller than intended. I suggested we increase our digital presence through targeted campaigns and influencer partnerships. Richard burst into laughter again. "Influencers. He wants us to pay teenagers to dance with our products." The room erupted in nervous laughter. Everyone following their boss's lead. I forced a smile and gathered my papers. But inside, something snapped. As I walked toward the door, I caught Richard's eye and whispered under my breath, "Never again." 6 months earlier, I'd walked into West Marketing Solutions with hope in my heart and dreams in my head. Fresh out of college with my business degree, I saw this job as my ticket to success. The salary wasn't amazing, but it was a start. Richard had seemed charming during my interview. Confident, successful, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my rent. He talked about growth opportunities and mentorship. I believed every word. "We need fresh blood around here," he'd said, shaking my hand. "Young minds with new ideas." My first day, I was eager to impress. I'd prepared a small presentation about improving client retention rates. Nothing fancy, just some ideas I'd researched. Richard listened politely, then smiled that same sharp smile I'd come to know so well. "Cute," he said, closing my folder without reading it. "Maybe focus on learning the basics first, kid. Try again in a few months." The dismissal stung, but I told myself he was right. I was new. I needed to prove myself first. Looking back now, I realized that moment set the tone for everything that followed. Richard had marked me as beneath him from day one, and he never let me forget it. The daily humiliations started small. Richard would interrupt me during meetings, finishing my sentences with his own ideas. When clients complimented my work, he'd jump in to take credit. Donald helped with some of the research, he'd say with a patronizing pat on my shoulder. "Good kid, learning the ropes." In team meetings, he'd make jokes about my age, my inexperience, my clothes. "Look at Donna trying to dress like a real businessman," he'd laugh when I wore my best suit. The other employees would chuckle nervously, afraid to defend me and become his next target. He criticized everything I did. My reports were too detailed or not thorough enough. My presentations lacked executive presence. My ideas were unrealistic or too basic. The worst part wasn't the public mockery. It was watching my confidence drain away day by day. I started second-guessing every decision, every email, every word I spoke in meetings. My college friends asked how the job was going. "Great," I'd lie. "Learning a lot." But alone in my apartment at night, I wondered if Richard was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe I really was just a naive kid pretending to understand business. The doubt ate at me like acid. The breaking point came 3 months into the job. I was walking past the conference room when I heard voices inside. The door was slightly open, and I recognized Richard's laugh. "You should see him trying to impress clients," Richard was saying. "Poor kid thinks he's some kind of business genius." I keep him around as the office mascot. Entertainment value. I pressed myself against the wall, listening as my world crumbled. "Isn't that a bit harsh?" asked a voice I recognized as our biggest client, Mr. Ralph. "Harsh? The kid needs to learn his place. Some people are born to lead, others to follow. Donna's definitely a follower." I stumbled to the bathroom, locked the door, and let the tears fall. 6 months of humiliation, of being treated like a child, of having my dreams crushed daily. I was done. But as I looked at myself in the mirror, red-eyed and broken, something changed. The hurt transformed into something harder, colder. "I won't quit," I whispered to my reflection. "I'll outlast you, Richard. I'll show you who's really meant to lead." That day marked the end of naive Donald and the birth of someone much more dangerous. I started documenting everything. Every snide comment, every stolen idea, every public humiliation got recorded in a private notebook. I saved emails where Richard took credit for my work. I noted dates and witnesses when he mocked me in meetings. Most importantly, I began making myself indispensable. When Richard was out of the office, which happened often thanks to his long lunches and golf meetings, I became the go-to person for urgent questions. I studied our client files obsessively. I memorized project details, budget numbers, and deadline schedules. While Richard coasted on charm and delegation, I built expertise. My performance reviews were always satisfactory, regardless of my actual contributions. Richard made sure of that. But I noticed something interesting in the client feedback forms. They praised my attention to detail, my quick responses, my willingness to help. I kept those compliments to myself. No point in giving Richard more ammunition for his jokes. The documentation wasn't just about building a case against Richard. It was about understanding how the business really worked, who held real power, and where the weak spots were. Knowledge, I was learning, was the most valuable currency in any office. My first real victory came during Richard's absence at a strategic planning retreat in Miami. Our second largest client, Northfield Industries, called with an urgent problem about their upcoming campaign launch. Instead of routing them to Richard's voicemail, I took the call myself. I'd been tracking their account closely and knew exactly what they needed. "Mr. Ralph, I can have those revisions ready by tomorrow morning," I said confidently. "I'll also include 3 alternative approaches that might better suit your target demographic." The next day, I delivered everything I'd promised plus detailed analytics supporting my recommendations. Mr. Ralph was impressed. When Richard returned, tanned and relaxed, he found a glowing email from Northfield praising the exceptional service they'd received. "Good work, Donna," Richard said, but his smile was tighter than usual. "Don't get used to it though. Clients like dealing with experienced professionals." But I'd seen something flicker in his eyes. Concern. Maybe even a hint of fear. For the first time since starting this job, I felt a genuine smile cross my face. Richard might not have noticed the shift, but I did. The client trusted me more than him, and we both knew it. At a local business networking event, I met Eleanor Blackwood, a retired executive who'd built and sold 3 companies. She was sharp, elegant, and had the kind of presence Richard pretended to possess. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," she observed as I stood alone by the refreshment table. I found myself telling her everything. About Richard's treatment, the stolen credit, the daily humiliations. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious. "I've met men like your Richard," she said finally. "Insecure bullies who mistake cruelty for leadership. They're actually quite fragile." "Fragile?" I laughed bitterly. "He owns the company. He has all the power." Eleanor smiled. "Power built on fear and incompetence isn't real power. It's an illusion. You don't beat men like that head on. You build yourself so strong they can't ignore you, then you build yourself so strong they can't survive without you. She handed me her business card. Call me if you want to discuss strategy. Real strategy. Walking to my car that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the naive hope of my first day, but something harder and more focused. Richard had taught me valuable lessons about power and respect. Just not the ones he'd intended. My faith in workplace friendships died 2 weeks later. Oliver, a junior account manager I'd considered my only ally, was talking to colleagues by the coffee machine. I approached to join the conversation but stopped when I heard my name. "Richard's right though," Oliver was saying. "Donald does get pretty emotional about feedback. Maybe it's because he's so young." "Remember when he teared up during that budget meeting?" added Stephanie from accounting. "So awkward." I backed away slowly, invisible to people who'd shared lunches with me, who'd complained to me about Richard's management style. They were just like everyone else, following the leader even when he wasn't around. That night, I called Eleanor. "I think I'm ready to discuss strategy," I said. "Smart boy. Here's lesson 1. Never trust anyone who won't stand up for you when you're not in the room. In business, loyalty is rare and precious. Most people will sacrifice you to save themselves. So what do? You play the long game alone. You build your skills, your knowledge, your network. You become invaluable. Then, when the time is right, you move." I hung up feeling lonelier than ever, but also clearer about my path forward. If I was going to win this war, I'd have to fight it solo. I began living a double life. During office hours, I played the role Richard expected, the eager junior employee who absorbed his insults with grateful smiles. I attended meetings, took notes, and kept my mouth shut unless directly asked to speak. But after work, I transformed. I enrolled in night classes for advanced marketing strategy and business finance. I studied case studies of successful company acquisitions. I read everything I could about corporate takeovers and hostile buyouts. Weekends were spent at the library, researching our competitors and analyzing industry trends. I built financial models and studied profit margins. I learned to read between the lines of quarterly reports. Richard never suspected. He saw what he wanted to see, a subordinate who knew his place. My secret education was paying off in small ways. I could predict client needs before they voiced them. I spotted cost-saving opportunities Richard missed. I understood our market position better than anyone else in the office. But I kept all of this hidden. Knowledge was my weapon, and surprise would be my strategy. Every night, I'd update my private files with new intelligence about West Marketing Solutions. Revenue streams, client relationships, operational weaknesses. I was mapping the company like a general planning a siege. Richard's first major mistake came during the Delta Industries presentation. He'd spent weeks bragging about landing this potential client, calling it his personal victory before we'd even pitched. The meeting was a disaster. Richard showed up unprepared, rambling about synergies and paradigm shifts while Delta's executives looked increasingly bored. When they asked specific questions about ROI projections, Richard fumbled. "Donald here can pull those numbers for you," he said, throwing me under the bus. But I was ready. I'd researched Delta Industries thoroughly, analyzing their market position and growth challenges. My impromptu presentation was sharp, focused, and data-driven. Delta's CEO, Mrs. Smith, took notes throughout my explanation. When I finished, she smiled for the first time all day. "Impressive analysis," she said. "This young man clearly understands our business." We won the account. Richard took full credit in his email to upper management, but I'd made connections that mattered more. Mrs. Smith specifically requested me as the primary contact for their account. Richard's fury was barely contained. "Don't think one lucky presentation makes you special," he hissed when we were alone. Clients like dealing with experience, not eager puppies. But his words rang hollow. We both knew what had really happened in that room. Richard's attempts to put me in my place became more creative and cruel. He'd assign me impossible deadlines, hoping I'd fail publicly. Weekend work became expected, not optional. He'd schedule important meetings when he knew I had conflicting commitments. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe corporate life isn't for you, he'd say with fake concern. But every challenge made me stronger. I developed systems for managing multiple projects simultaneously. I built relationships with vendors who could deliver rush jobs. I learned to anticipate problems before they became crises. The breaking point came when he assigned me 3 major presentations due the same day, each requiring different skill sets and extensive research. This will separate the men from the boys, he announced in front of the entire team. I delivered all 3 flawlessly. The clients were thrilled. My colleagues were stunned. Richard was speechless. That night, I sat in my apartment updating my secret business plan. What had started as revenge fantasy was becoming something more concrete, more achievable. You'd make a good secretary someday, Richard had sneered after my triple victory. Secretary. The man who just watched me manage 3 complex projects simultaneously thought I should be answering phones. That was the moment I decided. I wouldn't just beat Richard. I'd own him. West Marketing Solutions was bleeding money, and only I seemed to notice. While Richard focused on expensive lunches and flashy presentations, the fundamentals were cracking. Our overhead costs had increased 30% in 6 months. Client retention was dropping as competitors offered better service at lower prices. 2 major accounts were quietly shopping for alternatives. Richard ignored the warning signs, dismissing financial concerns as accountant nonsense. When our CFO tried to discuss budget cuts, Richard waved him away. Revenue solves everything, Richard declared. We just need bigger clients, bigger deals. But his big deals kept falling through. His expensive pitches failed to convert. His networking events produced contacts but not contracts. I watched the company's health decline with clinical interest. Every missed opportunity, every wasted dollar, every poor decision was noted in my private files. During one particularly revealing moment, I saw fear flicker across Richard's face as he reviewed quarterly numbers. The first crack in his armor of arrogance. He quickly masked it with his usual bluster, but I'd seen the truth. Richard West was not the business genius he pretended to be. He was a fraud coasting on inherited success, and his luck was running out. That realization changed everything about my strategy. Eleanor introduced me to her former business partner, Charles Whitmore, who ran Miller Strategic Group, a competitor to West Marketing. Charles was everything Richard wasn't: quiet, thoughtful, genuinely competent. Eleanor tells me you're stuck with a difficult boss, Charles said over coffee. She also tells me you have exceptional analytical skills. We discussed the marketing industry, client management strategies, and emerging trends. Charles was impressed by my insights and knowledge of our mutual competitors. If you're ever looking to grow your career, he said carefully, we could use someone with your talent and work ethic. We value competence over politics here. I thanked him but didn't commit. Not yet. I had bigger plans brewing. Later, Eleanor explained Charles's offer. He's not just offering you a job, Donald. He's offering you a partnership track. But I suspect you're thinking even bigger than that. She was right. Working for another boss, even a good one, wasn't the endgame I had in mind. What if I told you I wanted to own West Marketing instead of just escaping it? Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. Then I'd say you're finally thinking like a real businessman. Let's talk about what that would require. Richard's next public humiliation attempt backfired spectacularly. During a team meeting with senior management present, he decided to mock my proposal for updating our client database system. "Donna here wants to spend money on computers instead of closing deals," he announced. Typical millennial thinking. Technology can't replace relationship building. But this time, the room didn't laugh. Our operations manager, Janet Walsh, leaned forward with interest. "Actually, our current system is creating bottlenecks," she said. "We've lost 2 proposals because of outdated client information." Donald's analysis looked solid. Richard's face reddened as other managers nodded agreement. His joke had become a serious business discussion, and he wasn't prepared for it. The company president, Howard West, Richard's uncle, studied my proposal carefully. "This is impressive work, Donald. How long did this analysis take you?" 2 weeks of evening research, sir." Howard's eyebrows rose. "Evening research? This wasn't assigned work?" "No, sir. I noticed inefficiencies and wanted to propose solutions." The silence that followed was golden. Richard squirmed as his uncle absorbed the implications. His nephew mocked employees for showing initiative. For the first time since I'd started working there, several colleagues looked at me with something resembling respect. The scandal broke on a Tuesday morning. Richard had been inflating billing hours for our largest client, Golden Gate Enterprises, padding projects with unnecessary services and charging premium rates for junior work. The client's forensic audit revealed over $50,000 in questionable charges across 6 months. Golden Gate's legal team was furious. They demanded explanations, refunds, and heads to roll. Richard tried to blame the billing department, then the project managers, then finally me. "Donald must have input the wrong codes," he claimed desperately. But I'd been documenting everything, including the emails where Richard explicitly instructed me to maximize billable hours by any means necessary. When Golden Gate's lawyers interviewed me, I provided copies of every relevant communication. The client walked away, taking their $1 million annual contract with them. Richard's reputation in the industry took a massive hit as word spread about the billing fraud. Howard West called an emergency management meeting. I wasn't invited, but I heard the shouting from down the hall. That afternoon, Richard emerged looking pale and shaken. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't make eye contact when we passed in the hallway. The mighty were starting to fall. Eleanor and Charles met with me at an upscale restaurant to discuss possibilities. The conversation was carefully coded, but the meaning was clear. West Mark. LLY if that company had recently lost major clients due to management issues. And if someone with intimate knowledge of the company's operations wanted to facilitate such an acquisition, Charles continued, proper legal channels would ensure everything remained above board. I listened carefully, my heart racing. We were talking about buying Richard's company out from under him. What would such a hypothetical person need to contribute? I asked. Market intelligence, client relationships, operational knowledge, Eleanor replied. Plus some financial investment to show good faith. I'd been saving aggressively for months, living on ramen noodles and used furniture. My bank account had grown to nearly $30,000. Not much in business terms, but enough for a down payment on revenge. When you say strategic partner, I pressed, would there be opportunities for advancement within the acquired company? Charles smiled. Hypothetically, we'd need someone to run the merged operations. Someone who understands both companies intimately. My pulse quickened. They weren't just offering me a buyout. They were offering me Richard's job. Richard's arrogance reached its peak even as his company crumbled around him. In a staff meeting, he pounded the conference table dramatically. Let me be clear about something, he declared. This company runs on my genius, my relationships, my vision. Anyone who thinks differently is welcome to test the job market. I sat quietly taking notes, just another dutiful employee recording the boss's wisdom. But I was actually documenting his promises for future reference. We've had some setbacks, Richard continued, but West Marketing Solutions is built on solid foundations. My foundations. As long as I'm in charge, this company will thrive. The irony was delicious. While Richard boasted about his indispensability, Charles and Eleanor were finalizing acquisition paperwork 3 blocks away. I'd provided detailed financial analysis, client contact information, and operational assessments. Everything was legal and ethical, just good business intelligence from a concerned employee looking to secure the company's future. Richard had no idea that his mascot was orchestrating his downfall with cold precision. After the meeting, he approached my desk with his familiar smirk. Taking good notes, Donna? You might learn something about real leadership. Always learning from you, sir, I replied with perfect sincerity. If he only knew exactly what I'd learned. My resignation letter sat in my desk drawer for 2 weeks before I used it. Not because I was hesitant, but because timing was everything. Eleanor and Charles had taught me that successful acquisitions required precise choreography. The target company needed to be weakened but not destroyed, vulnerable but not worthless. West Marketing was approaching that sweet spot. Client defections were accelerating. Richard's reputation was toxic. Howard West was asking harder questions about his nephew's management. But the company still had valuable assets, existing contracts, experienced staff, established vendor relationships. With proper leadership, it could be salvaged and rebuilt. I spent those 2 weeks preparing meticulously. I gathered my documentation, secured my financial backing, and finalized my partnership agreement with Miller Strategic Group. Most importantly, I prepared mentally for what was coming. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about justice, respect, and proving that merit mattered more than connections. The boy Richard had mocked was about to become his boss. Every evening, I'd pull out that resignation letter and imagine the moment I'd deliver it. Not as an escape, but as a declaration of war. The final straw came when Hartwell Corporation, our second largest client, terminated their contract. Richard had missed 3 consecutive deadlines and blamed his team for every failure. It's not my fault the staff can't execute my vision, he raged during the post-mortem meeting. But Hartwell's departure sent shockwaves through the office. 2 major clients lost in 2 months meant layoffs were coming. People started updating their resumes and networking frantically. Richard's response was predictable: double down on blame and increase pressure on remaining staff. He instituted mandatory Saturday work and eliminated overtime pay. If people don't like it, they can leave, he announced. I built this company from nothing once. I can do it again. The delusion was breathtaking. Richard hadn't built anything. He'd inherited a successful firm from his uncle and was systematically destroying it through incompetence and ego. That afternoon, I called Eleanor. It's time, I said simply. Are you ready for what comes next? She asked. Once you start this process, there's no going back. I looked around the office at my demoralized colleagues, at the empty desks where terminated employees used to sit, at Richard's closed door behind which he was probably planning his next blame-shifting strategy. I've been ready for months. Miller Strategic Group's acquisition offer arrived on Howard West's desk Thursday morning. The proposal was generous but not extravagant, a full buyout of West Marketing Solutions with guarantees for existing employees and contracts. Howard called an emergency board meeting. The company's financial situation was dire enough that any serious offer demanded consideration. Richard wasn't initially concerned. Some competitor trying to buy us cheap while we're down, he told anyone who'd listen. Uncle Howard would never sell to outsiders. But Richard didn't understand how business really worked. Howard West was a pragmatist who'd built his wealth through smart decisions, not family loyalty. He could see the numbers as clearly as anyone. By Friday afternoon, Richard was panicking. The acquisition talks were serious, and he wasn't included in the discussions. You can't sell, he pleaded with his uncle. "This is my company. I've put everything into it." "You've put it into the ground," Howard replied coldly. "These people are offering to save what's left." What Richard still didn't know was who these people really were. The acquisition documents listed Miller Strategic Group as the primary buyer, with various silent partners providing additional financing. One of those silent partners was a young man he'd spent months calling his office mascot. The truth revealed itself Monday morning in the conference room where Richard had humiliated me so many times. I walked in wearing my best suit, the one he'd mocked as trying too hard to look professional. Charles Whitmore sat at the head of the table with legal documents spread before him. Eleanor was there as an advisor. Howard West looked tired but relieved. Richard entered expecting another family meeting about finances. Instead, he found me sitting calmly in his usual chair. "What's he doing here?" Richard demanded, pointing at me like I was some uninvited pest. "Donald is here," Howard said slowly, "because he's one of the new owners." The color drained from Richard's face so quickly I thought he might faint. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. "That's impossible," he whispered. Charles slid a document across the table. "Donald provided crucial intelligence for this acquisition. His analysis of the company's operations, client relationships, and growth potential made this deal possible." Richard's eyes darted between me and the papers, his mind struggling to process what was happening. You planned this. You betrayed me." I met his gaze steadily. I learned from the best teacher about workplace loyalty. For the first time in our relationship, Richard had nothing to say. The deal closed that afternoon. Miller Strategic Group officially acquired West Marketing Solutions for $2 million, assuming all debts and employee obligations. I owned 15% of the company as part of my investment package, with options to increase my stake based on performance. Charles would serve as interim CEO while I transitioned into the role of Director of Operations. The staff meeting to announce the changes was surreal. I watched my former colleagues' faces as Charles explained the new ownership structure and introduced me as part of the management team. Oliver's jaw dropped. Stephanie from accounting looked confused. Janet Walsh smiled and nodded approvingly. She'd always recognized my contributions. "Some personnel changes will be necessary," Charles announced diplomatically. "But we're committed to retaining talented employees who share our values of competence and collaboration." Richard sat in the back of the room, still in shock. His uncle had already informed him that his employment was terminated as part of the acquisition agreement. After the meeting, several colleagues approached me with congratulations and questions. The same people who'd laughed at his jokes were now eager to align with new power. I was polite but careful. I'd learned hard lessons about workplace loyalty. Friday afternoon, I asked Richard to clean out his office. The reversal was so complete it felt like fiction, but here we were, me holding the authority, him packing his belongings into cardboard boxes. "How could you do this?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I gave you a job. I taught you the business." "You taught me plenty," I agreed. "Just not what you intended." Richard's hands shook as he gathered his personal items. The expensive suits, the golf trophies, the photos with clients who no longer returned his calls. "The staff will never respect you," he said desperately. "They know you're just some kid who got lucky." I considered his words. Maybe. But I'd rather earn respect through competence than demand it through fear. As Richard carried his boxes toward the elevator, he stopped and turned back. "This isn't over, Donald. I have connections in this industry. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did." "What I did," I said calmly, "was help save a failing company and preserve jobs you were destroying with your incompetence." The elevator doors closed on Richard's career at West Marketing Solutions. After 18 months of daily humiliation, watching him disappear felt anticlimactic. But justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just quiet satisfaction and the knowledge that merit finally mattered. 3 months later, Richard showed up at my office begging for work. Gone were the expensive suits and arrogant swagger. He looked smaller, older, desperate. "Donald, I know we had our differences," he began, "but I need this job. No one else will hire me after what happened." I let him talk. He explained how the industry had blacklisted him following the Golden Gate billing scandal. His networking contacts had dried up. His savings were depleted. "I'm willing to start at entry level," he said, the words clearly painful. "I just need a chance to rebuild." The irony was perfect. The man who'd called me his office mascot was now pleading for the chance to work under my authority. I studied Richard's face, seeing genuine desperation for the first time. Part of me wanted to lecture him about respect and consequences. Part of me wanted to detail every humiliation he'd inflicted on me. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, the same chair where he'd once held court, and gave him the exact same smile he'd given me during my first presentation. "I appreciate you coming in," I said with practiced politeness. "But you're just not the right fit for our company culture." Richard's face crumpled. He'd heard those words before, in different contexts, when he was the one holding power. I walked Richard to the elevator one final time, but now the dynamic was completely reversed. He shuffled beside me like a broken man, while I moved with the confidence that came from earning my position rather than inheriting it. "Donald," he said as the elevator arrived, "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I was wrong." The apology was 18 months too late, but I acknowledged it with a nod. "Good luck, Richard." As the doors closed, I felt something I hadn't expected, not triumph, but peace. The angry young man who'd sworn revenge in that bathroom mirror was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more focused. I returned to my office, formerly Richard's corner suite, and looked out at the city where I'd once felt so small and powerless. West Marketing Solutions was thriving under new management. We'd retained key clients, attracted new ones, and built a culture based on merit rather than politics. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor, "Proud of you. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I'm buying." Outside my window, the city hummed with possibility. Somewhere out there, other young professionals were enduring their own workplace bullies, absorbing daily humiliations, wondering if competence would ever triumph over connections. I hoped my story would reach them eventually. Not as inspiration for revenge, but as proof that patient strategy and quiet determination could overcome any obstacle. Sometimes the best victory isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something better than they ever could.